Welcome to Master Teachers Session 3, entitled Daily Rhythms for Home Teachers. Hi, I'm Marcia Somerville, and I'd like to welcome you to this third session of the Master Teacher Series. I want to start by commending you for working through this series. Some of what I say is challenging, I know, but I'm working hard to be honest with you and tell you the truth so that you can improve to be the best teacher you can be. What I admire about you is that you want to hear the truth, and you want to work at improving yourself, or you wouldn't be here. Please receive my admiration for your effort and a warm virtual hug as we get started here today. This is the third of 6 core sessions that serve Christian home educators in groups or in home settings. In this session, we're going to be moving out of the purely foundational aspects of teaching that we've been discussing into actual teaching methods and teaching tips. Even so, some of the things that I focus on in this session may not be the most exciting tips you've ever heard, or even hit on your own personal areas of weakness. That said, both group and home-based learning rely on tasks that are ordered in regular, predictable rhythms. When done faithfully, these promote stability, peace, and reliability that students need to learn. Home academies and some group classes can actually fail because teachers don't pay adequate attention to 4 crucial areas that we're going to cover today. Number 1, the ordering of our teaching environment. Number 2, the management of tools, supplies, and paperwork that are used to teach. Number 3, the skill of ordering priorities and holding to them. And 4, the need to do long-range and weekly planning. These are the topics that we're going to address today in some detail. As with sessions 1 and 2, there's follow-up reading in Love the Journey, and we're offering handouts of various kinds for you to complete if you're doing this course for credit, and you'll need to hand in certain ones of them. There's a lot of material to cover in these topics, so I'm going to be speaking pretty quickly, but luckily with video and audio, there's always a chance to play things back and hear them again if I rush over material too fast. And again, Love the Journey provides you with much more detail on these topics than I'm able to cram into 1 hour. Now I want to start with an old proverb that goes like this. For the want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For the want of the shoe, the horse was lost. For the want of the horse, the rider was lost. For the want of the rider, the message was lost. For the want of the message, the battle was lost. For the want of the battle, the kingdom was lost. And all for the want of a horseshoe nail. Now, you've probably heard this before. The idea is that, in hindsight, it was the lack of attention to smaller things that led to the unraveling of bigger, more significant things. For the want of a horseshoe nail, at the end, a kingdom is lost. This session is designed to highlight the importance of mastering organizational aspects of home teaching. These are, if you will, the horseshoe nails that can be so crucial to the longevity of our teaching careers. Now, some of you may be wondering about this session's title, Daily Rhythms for Home Teachers, when one clearly stated goal for this Master Teacher Series is to equip those who teach in the Tapestry University Fellowship Groups or other group classes. Quite simply, fellowship groups, co-ops, virtual classes online, all of these are aids and usually supplements to home teaching. Homeschooling, by definition, is based in the home. Typically, a large portion of the success or failure of group classes for homeschool students rests on the diligence of parents at home. These have to maintain their schedules, their homes, and their students' academic pursuits in such a way that the student who enrolls in, arrives on time to, and is regularly prepared for group classes participates well. If the support of parents isn't faithfully given, group classes can fall apart rather quickly. Things like chronic lateness, unpreparedness, or bad classroom manners should be grounds for dismissal from any group class, since if they're tolerated in even one student for very long, the whole class is really dragged down. Those of you who are fellowship group leaders or classroom teachers may wish to note some of the points in this presentation as things that you need to require of the parents of students that you teach. Fellowship group classes work best when they are seen by participating parents and students alike as a privilege and not a right. When we join in groups, we lose some of our flexibility and freedom to act independently because our choices affect the entire group. Now, if our choices produce bad effects, group leaders need to be able to step in with corrective measures. So parents need to understand from the get-go that their diligent support at home is essential groundwork for class participation for their students ongoing. Part of the job of those who lead group classes, therefore, is to communicate clear expectations and, unfortunately, consequences if the expectations aren't met. No one starts a year thinking that things will go badly, but because we live in a fallen world, wise leaders establish clear expectations for specific rules and tasks. They also will have a written policy in place for dismissing those who detract seriously from groups ongoing. And the same skilled leaders will also build in some margin. They'll allow some grace for the occasional lapse on the part of students and of teachers in their groups that can happen due to things like vacations and illnesses and other unexpected events. Now that I've explained how home environments relate to group classes, this session will focus on managing our homes, our teaching materials, our priorities, and our planning for excellent teaching to the glory of God. In sessions 1 and 2, I've been using the analogy of securing a firm foundation for a sky-high building that represents our high aspirations for effective teaching to the glory of God and for the good of our families. I'm now going to dub this our teaching tower. You know, we've been noting that foundations are pretty much invisible to the casual observer, but are essential to the overall structure. The content of this session puts the finishing touches on our firm foundation and begins to construct the first floor, as it were, of our teaching tower. For those of you who've been waiting for more practical tips, this session is peppered with them, so I hope you enjoy it, but please understand that the more detailed one gets in terms of practical how-tos, the more various points in lectures like this apply to some listeners more than others. My audience for these sessions is quite broad, so I recognize that not every point will hit each listener squarely where they need to be helped. You'll need to exercise discernment, by which I mean please listen to the Holy Spirit as I talk. Only He can quicken to you the things that you need to heed, and whisper that other things may be meant for other listeners, not you. Let's take a moment and pray together that God will prevent condemnation, bring conviction where needed, and encourage you as you listen. Well, Father God, we do pray these things. We ask you, Holy Spirit, who is omniscient and omnipresent and can span space and time. Father, as I'm praying this today, I pray that it will go down through time and space to the heart of each person who listens to this presentation, that you are her Father, that you are taking her by the hand, that you are leading her one step at a time, one day at a time, into better and better and more blessed things. Father God, I ask you that each listener here would be able to discern what is meant for her and what is meant for others. I pray against any satanic condemnation, and I pray only that people would grow and profit from this session. In Jesus' name, I ask a lot, but I ask it because you are a great God. Amen. Okay, we're going to start with topic 1, that of ordering our teaching environment. And as I usually do, I'd like to start with a principle that defines the how-tos of this session and summarizes the content of the homework that I'm going to assign that cover this topic. Here's the first principle. God is orderly, and in His image, teachers diligently labor to bring order out of chaos, so that fruitful work may be done in peace, and so that our children may learn to rely on the deeper truths that we're trying to teach them as we homeschool. Returning a minute to that teaching tower, let's think together about building construction. You know, building sites are messy during the workday. Walking through the center of activity, you could easily feel that the environment is chaotic. There are scraps and nails, tools, sawdust, and building materials half open and strewing around. There are men yelling to each other. Things are jumbled together. But come back to that same space as the workday is ending. The better builders budget in time at each day's end to have their crews clean up before quitting for the day. It's part of what they pay them to do, so it must be valuable. On such a construction site, crews take easily 15 to 30 minutes each day to clean up. As we begin to think about such things as order and planning, I want to say up front that most homes will closely resemble construction zones during the school day. Homeschooling involved tools like pencils and paper and craft supply, messes that are made as learning is going on, and resource materials that will be used throughout the year. When in the midst of our day, the chaos can become extreme. But like those better builders, we can create daily rhythms that allow us to work freely through the day, but also to budget in specific times to daily restore order. In my experience, the balance between allowing a certain amount of creative chaos during the day and then restoring order each night is fundamental to excellent home teaching. As I've worked with moms over the years, I've found that if this balancing act isn't well mastered, the teaching ability can really be affected. Let's take some time to look at the direct connections between mess, order, and teaching. Now, to some women, keeping an orderly home comes easily. My mother was one of these. But I would not have been one of these women as I entered marriage. My room as a teenager and as a college student was far from orderly or clean. My mom didn't force me to clean as a child. She hired a housekeeper, and I took advantage of that housekeeper and waited for her to show up each week. In fact, I didn't really learn to love order until after I became a Christian about halfway through college. I got married directly after college, and we brought home our first child on our first anniversary. Subsequently, I had 4 more children, so I had 5 children under the age of 7 at one point. Now, as I grew as a Christian, I was exhorted by several godly women in my life to work harder at this area of keeping an orderly, clean home. As I began to realize that mothering and my household was my career and found my feet as a mother of babies and toddlers, I put more and more effort into learning those skills that I needed to keep my home both clean and picked up. Early on, I worked hard to teach my little children the principle that if you get it out, put it away, right away. Now, that's a good rule if you're playing a game in the afternoon or using a single toy, but it's not always workable, I've found. For instance, what if the kids are in the middle of a board game and you call them for lunch? Do they need to pick it all up before coming to the table? Well, probably not. Or similarly, what if they're working on a complex Lego project, or a 1,000-piece puzzle, or a science experiment, or they have 5 resource books out because they're high schoolers and they're trying to do a research paper? The older your kids get, the less workable it can be to put everything away right away the minute you're finished with it. So, over time, I recognized that academic lessons can string together, and also they begin to overlap other activities like meals, morning devotions, errands out of the home, nature walks, classes or activities that are also out of the home, etc. In specific ways, those of us who work at keeping an orderly home need to give our kids permission to make messes as they're working through their lessons each day. If we're overly focused on put it away right away every time, we can unnecessarily burden them and ourselves in the homeschooling process. Now, the good news is that as your kids grow from being young elementary and toddlers to a mix of upper elementary and junior high and then older, you typically find it easier and easier to share the load with your kids and establish ways that allow the work of homeschooling to mess up your home, but then the kid power in the home to restore it each day via what we came to call daily pickups. Daily pickups are short, specific sessions, usually lasting about 10 or 15 minutes, when all the materials that we had gotten out during the day were returned to the places designated for them, if possible. Obviously, if a project was still being worked on, it was left up, but the detritus, if you will, the small things that are spread out and scattered around during the homeschool day, most of that can be picked up. And it's truly amazing how much you can accomplish in just a few regularly conducted pickup sessions per day. Now, daily pickups rest on a foundation of 2 basic constants in your life. One is that you have in place a system to get the weekly heavy cleaning done. And 2, that you have in place an organized system to this degree. If a child stands with something in his hand and wants to put it away properly, he knows where it's supposed to go. In other words, there should be a place for everything, even if not everything gets back to its place daily. The ordering of our general environments make it so much easier for us and our children as they grow older to manage the essential academic elements that we need to learn. And in turn, the good management of this stuff is foundational to the best teaching. Because truly, there are aspects of keeping your stuff orderly that are directly related to teaching in the home. For instance, what if you can't find key ingredients to lessons? It's those little things that can really trip us up if they're consistently missing. For instance, what about the pencil that we can't find for the math lesson? Or what about that missing spelling workbook that means that we can't study for a test or give a test? How about that lost red or blue crayon that our activity book calls for in order to complete a map page? Or how about those lost pieces to the educational puzzle that we bought to occupy our preschoolers while we were teaching older kids? These little setbacks give children an excuse not to do lessons, or an excuse to complain maybe they've seen us complaining, as they try to get them done without having the key ingredients that they need. This also often bears on how group classes turn out as well. If students come to group classes saying, well, we were missing the crayon or we were missing the spelling book, then they have a ready-made excuse for not doing lessons for group teachers, and group teachers really don't know what goes on in the home. Also, cluttered conditions in the home can be distracting for many visual learners. Such disorder really can contribute to an inability to concentrate. On the flip side, and tying back to our discussion of discipleship in session 2, your example of diligent care in keeping things orderly will be more easily caught than taught. Children of neat mothers are not automatically neat. I can tell you from experience with both myself and my own children, and those of my friends, and you probably know some too. But if or when God puts into their hearts to literally clean up their acts, your example will supply them with a vision and the how-tos that will help them develop these skills later in life. Also, because neatness doesn't genetically transfer, as moms, we need to shoulder the responsibility of requiring students to practice neatness and order, even if it doesn't come easily for them. If this is an area of difficulty for you, please know that with God's help and applying yourself diligently to this area, you really can improve. Here are some key ideas for moving forward if this is you. Give yourself time, recognizing that you didn't get into this mess in a day, and a short burst of focused effort won't build habits. Habits are what you're after retraining, and those take time, so allow yourself time as you begin to tackle this area of your life. Next, it's good to take stock of specific areas in your home that trip you up consistently. Take a look at whether it's that laundry that never gets folded, or those overflowing bookshelves that need organizing and maybe dejunking. Possibly it's that closet, or maybe you have too many kitchen tools and need to organize a yard sale. In all of this, recognize that you're not alone. There are many women who do not homeschool, and yet they struggle with managing the stuff in their homes. As a result, you can find books, blogs, and websites devoted to the topic of conquering this challenge. And as you tackle it head-on, remember that your children are watching you work at overcoming something that's hard for you. Later, when you exhort them to work at something that's hard for them, you'll have a point of contact there, and will have set a good example that you can draw on when you exhort them to do better. Now, after you gain clarity of the points of difficulties and find some possible solutions, you can then work at making specific, measurable, appropriate, realistic, and time-bound SMART goals for improvement. Your overall focus should be to build new habits over time in specific ways that you identify. Now, even baby steps of effort should be noted and celebrated. Seek encouragement. As you evaluate your progress, set rewards for yourself. You will get further faster if you start small and build on successful efforts than if you make a grand and exhausting plan that is not appropriate or realistic and fall on your face. Again, I know this from personal experience. God is the God of redemption. Recognizing our weaknesses and confessing them to Him and to others can be the first step forward in growth. Even if this has long been an area of weakness for you, you can grow. You can conquer the chaos with God's help. Doing so will make you a better teacher if this is indeed a weak area for you. And if you're strong in this area, renewing your commitment to ordering your teaching stuff and remembering to allow for periods of chaotic mess amidst the work of home education is always appropriate. And most of us have that one closet or laundry pile or desktop that could be conquered if we made a more concentrated effort. All right, let's go on now to section 2, which is about managing the tools and supplies and paperwork of homeschooling. Within the scope of generally ordering the learning environment is the subtopic of keeping the stuff that we as teachers and our kids as students use to accomplish learning objectives. Excellent teachers simply must develop rhythms and systems to keep our school tools and resource materials in order. First, you need to get these kinds of materials into your home. Now, to do this, you need to develop time slots and systems that enable you to purchase these in a timely way, so that they are in hand when we come to teach. This goes hand in hand with the planning rhythms that we'll discuss a little later in this session. You also want, of course, to set an example for your students and make the most of your investments in teaching materials by maintaining them well. Examples of this are things like the following. Putting up craft supplies properly. You know, when you get to the end of a craft, sometimes you just don't have the energy or time to put things away properly, and as a result, things can get dried out, ruined, and lost. So putting away little pieces, crayons, pastels, colored pencils, etc., and cleaning up or putting away perishable materials like acrylic paints, Play-Doh, glue, things like that, are crucial to maintaining our investment in our craft supplies and also keeping them in order. Another example of this would be finding all the game parts as we finish a game and putting the box away properly. How about daily or maybe weekly sometimes collecting books and texts into designated shelves or desk spaces in our homes? Another job for teachers and students alike is filing papers in file folders or notebooks. Here's another example, keeping track of and returning borrowed library books in a timely way so that we don't pay fines. All of these and more contribute to the peace and stability of your teaching environment and are part of what goes into becoming a master teacher. Now, all educators also need to manage student products, and home educators are not exceptions. You need to establish rhythms and systems that order student papers, projects, portfolios, assignment sheets, and the like. I'm lumping all these together, calling them student products. Now, some student products are craft projects, or display boards, or oral reports, but most of what students produce is on paper, or in the younger years especially, in workbooks. Typically, you should grade projects using rubrics that allow the student to know their criteria at the start. And after grading, you're going to need to establish a place to keep or file these grading rubrics, usually along with other paperwork associated with general record keeping. Now, because projects take up a lot of space, finished ones I mean, after students complete them, you might want to establish a scrapbook or a portfolio system wherein you keep only pictures of the finished works, and possibly at each unit's end, about quarterly in the year, you can have older students annotate the pictures. This is a great way to review what you've just covered in a unit, and also students love looking at the pictures and writing a little bit about what each one was and what they learned from it. Moving on to what we as teachers need to manage in paper, our paperwork rhythms and systems need to order the spectrum of tasks that we perform as teachers. So first, we have to establish grading criteria for all student products ahead of assigning them. I just alluded to this with the rubric. Before a student starts an assignment, it should be clear to him how to get an A if he wants to. This should be in some written form, either a detailed paragraph per letter grade or a numerical score sheet or a rubric, as I just mentioned, that allows the student a spectrum view of his goals. Often we need to offer our students feedback on their work at various stages of completion. Examples of this would be reading a student's draft composition and marking it up, or viewing and commenting on a craft or other project in its early stages, or looking over a first math problem or two after a new concept has just been taught. Why do we need to do this? Giving guidance to our students when they're midway through their work allows for early detection of mistakes in the making, which can be a great opportunity for teachable moments. So, midway feedback is important, and then when the project is finished, we have to grade the assignment in a timely way so that the student knows how he's performed. Finally, we need to record these grades in a place where they can be retrieved and tallied for quarterly and year-end grades. Now, if we neglect these feedback and grading tasks, we really can adversely affect our students in several ways. Students who don't get midstream kind of feedback on initial efforts can't know if they're on the right track, and might get frustrated because they continue on that track only to receive a poor grade at the end of a lot of effort. Regular grading of student products, finished ones I mean, is especially important with math or composition or grammar, the disciplines that build systematically. I'd like to give you an example from our own homeschool. Two of our sons, at various different times when they were early high schoolers, spent 3 months not properly doing their math lessons because my husband and I neglected to check up on their work. They had been reliable in terms of checking their own work from answer keys over the years, and we assumed, wrongly, that they had been just as reliable in checking their math lessons. It actually turned out that for each of these boys, they walked for about 3 months in deception and lies to us as a result of our neglect of checking up on their work. So it can have serious consequences if you don't do the regular rhythm of grading finished assignments. Also, home-taught students who aren't graded reliably, or for whom records aren't kept, can come to feel like their efforts are pointless. Remember, they have no classmates to compare their progress with. If we don't give them grades or feedback on their work products, their understandable reactions over time can go like this. Why try to excel when there's no sense of accomplishment or failure? You don't ever know how you did, which leads to a lack of motivation to try, and if you don't gain any rewards or reap any negative consequences, again, why be motivated to try at all? Of course, all we've been talking about with meaningful feedback is an important feature of excellent teaching in group classes as well. Feedback and grading are crucial to all teacher-student relationships. Now, all of these teaching tasks that I've been talking about here take time, and we won't do them unless we earmark specific daily or weekly time slots in which to accomplish them. This is part of the set of weekly rhythms that undergird homeschooling, and for which parents often have little training, especially when they first start homeschooling. And part of the challenge of homeschooling is that your rhythms change as your students grow older. When the children are younger, you probably have to grade every last piece of paper or student product. As the students get older, though, they really can usually be relied on to at least check things like spelling quizzes and math lessons, although, as I've just demonstrated, you need to be checking what they check to make sure that they remain trustworthy. The handout for this session gives you a checklist from which you can create your unique set of must-do teacher tasks that are part of setting up systems and rhythms for teaching that involve paperwork and managing the stuff of homeschooling. Okay, that's topic 2 of our 4 topics for this session. Now let's say that you've gotten your homekeeping chores in basic balance, and also you've established basic systems for managing the teaching materials and providing feedback to students. What else are necessary rhythms and systems to establish for optimal success as a home teacher? 2 of the most essential revolve around how you prioritize your time and how you structure your days. Let's take these in order. Section 3, Ordering Our Priorities. American cultural norms would teach us that our lives are stretching out before us with lots of time for everything we want to do, and that our opportunities are virtually limitless. Furthermore, we're often tempted to think that we can and should do everything. In contrast, Psalm 90:12 says, "So teach us to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom." The Bible teaches us that here on earth we are finite creatures. We can't do all that enters our minds, or that others say that we should do. We're limited. Psalm 144 is one of several passages that reminds us that man is like a breath. His days are like a passing shadow. Other places talk about human lives as mere flowers of the field that wither and blow away. Because we're limited, we will simply have to make choices, and each choice that we make has consequences for and puts limits on other opportunities. Economists have a term for this. They call it the opportunity cost for each buying or management decision. Let's say both your washing machine and your refrigerator break down in the same day, and you have $1,000 in your savings account. If both have broken down, you're going to need to analyze and prioritize which is the more important machine to replace. You can't replace both new. Maybe there's a third way. Maybe you could replace them both used. In any case, you're going to have to make priorities for that money. And when it comes to home teaching, we too make choices that bring limits to other options. So the need for prioritizing arises. In planning sessions, a wise Christian teacher looks at the eternal worth of each opportunity and tries to recognize the limits that one choice can have for other options. For instance, if my child wants to play in a baseball league, it may mean that he'll need to play games on Sundays. But to play games on Sundays, it will affect the family's opportunities for church attendance. Which do you prioritize? Or maybe the child wants to go on a missions trip, and we're all for it, but he needs to work a job that would take time away from homework during the challenging junior high semester. Which would be the better priority? Those of you who are group teachers, you might need to weigh the relative merits of assigning multi-week presentation projects involving teams, or assigning individual reading followed up with written papers or tests. Both of these approaches to teaching have merits. Which one will serve the overall goals that you have for your class most effectively? These are the kinds of priorities that as teachers we often have to weigh. Now, many of us don't see the need to prioritize until we feel the pinch of not having done so. Before we even realize that this is the source of our problem, we can become overcommitted, and we can grow anxious or confused as we wrestle with conflicting desires but don't realize that we can't do them all. And we can end up exhausted or discouraged as we try to do it all because we can't decide what to let go of. Now, the reason that I focused on goal setting in session 1 of the Master Teacher series, and on the spiritual dimension of our calling as Christian parents and educators in session 2 of this series, were to alert you to the central truth that in order to become a master teacher, you need to purposefully develop priorities for your time and for your students that will enable you to make wise choices. In your homework for this session, I've assigned a foundational chapter in Love the Journey called Keeping a Quiet Home. This chapter presents a vision for prioritizing at-home teaching as opposed to embracing a lot of outside-the-home opportunities, especially when the children are younger. It discusses the fruits that can grow from making choices to be mainly at home during the majority of our days, and sort of the bad fruit that can result from not doing so. Now, this one vision of a quiet home won't serve as a model for all homeschoolers at all times, since God calls each family to unique circumstances. But the chapter features a principle based on a key passage from Holy Scripture that does apply to all of us. It's found in John 15:2. We read these words of the Lord Jesus. He says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch of mine that does not bear fruit, he takes away. But every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit." Look closely at this passage with me. Jesus says that he prunes good branches that are bearing fruit in favor of branches that are bearing even more fruit. Now, I live on a farm, and I'm learning that pruning is an ongoing yearly task. Each winter, when the trees are dormant, the skilled farmer assesses the growth from the year before. He then prunes away perfectly good branches so that only the best, highest yielding ones remain to get light and air and sap and rainfall in the growing season ahead. As parents and disciplers, and as academic teachers, a key part of our job is to assess our students' time, talents, and progress, and then make adjustments. Sometimes those adjustments involve tough decisions that amount to pruning good things in order to make room for better ones. And the pruning process is needed pretty much throughout our careers as parents and educators. As parents, as disciplers, and as academic teachers, we also need to be assessing ourselves. We need to look at how we are spending our time and whether we've embraced or developed or are clinging to elements of our days and weeks or seasons that the Lord would prune, at least for now. I could easily give a list of these kinds of activities that often need pruning and are hard to cut out. There are so many, but here are just a few examples. We can slip little by little into spending too much time on the computer, where temptations to chat on Facebook, play video games, or even do excessive research abound. Are we open to pruning such activities when they intrude on our parenting and teaching priorities? Here's another example. We might need to prune volunteer work at beloved organizations such as soup kitchens or crisis pregnancy centers, or even at church in some seasons. For us, the high school years were intense, especially because we had children in lower learning levels as well as high school during many of those years. We went to a vibrant, active church, and they had numerous meetings for children and parents on all learning levels, and it was all good. However, such activities began to seriously take away from our teaching focus, and so we needed to pray and seek counsel about our priorities. Both teaching our children and serving in other organizations are worthy callings, but again, because we're limited, we can't always do both. Different families will find different responses to this challenge, but find a solution we must. Here's an example that younger moms run into. Weekly playgroups might have worked fine when you had one child who wasn't napping, but may then need to be pruned when number 2 comes along and needs regular nap times, and that's hard. We can really miss the fellowship and encouragement that come with hanging out with other mothers. So again, for you, which would be the right choice? I can't decide that for you, but you need to look at it. Here's another one. Involvement in sports or scouting or other worthy activities that mean that we moms and possibly younger siblings spend much time in carpooling and/or at games or events, and less time than is needed in doing academic lessons. Well, we might need some pruning. Do you cut out the activities or simplify and streamline the curriculum? That's something for each family to decide individually. Finally, let me try this one. Income from a satisfying job outside the home might give us a welcome break from home chores and be manageable when children are growing into teens and need our supervision less, but then we might suddenly need to reassess this view if our children fall in with the wrong crowd or need more close supervision and support. Which do you prioritize, the job or the needy teens? Again, that's something that the Lord will lead you in with the counsel and advice of your husband, pastors, and others. These are just a few examples. As we covered in session 1, this is what those first 4 chapters of Love the Journey are all intended to help you do. Set those priorities so that you can learn to stick to them. My reason for bringing up the topic in this session is that your priorities will affect your daily rhythms. If you currently feel out of kilter, rushed or behind or discouraged, and can't place why, it might be that you need to do some pruning, as painful as it might be. Now the good news is that whether it's the amount of stuff in our homes, or the number of activities that we're committed to, or the number of tasks that we've taken on, pruning is almost always an option. You can de-junk that house. You usually can remove yourself or your family members from activities over time. Often you can delegate tasks to others, or simply decide that they don't have a priority in your life. Back when I was pregnant with our 4th child, I remember the Lord speaking to me one day in my heart, and He said, "You are to stop using cloth diapers, stop making your own bread, and stop making your own spaghetti sauce." He was that specific. He knew that my desires were to choose the cheapest and healthiest options available for my family, but it was time that I embrace other priorities than these, if His goals for our family were to be met. I'm so grateful that God is so specific, so loving, and so kind as to meet us where we are. If you know that you need to prune, but don't know where to start with prayer. We are limited, finite creatures, not superwomen, as many of us tend to believe we should be. We can do many things, but not all things well. That's just a reality of our limitations, and we do better to accept them and work within those limitations than to destroy our families and our ability to teach effectively by denying them. Jesus said to Martha, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but only one thing is necessary." And as we all know, that one thing was sitting at Jesus' feet to listen to His teachings and give Him our whole hearts. Martha was trying to serve at least 13 hungry men to the glory of God. She just wasn't remembering what the top priority was for Jesus. Master teachers need to learn to quiet their hearts when the din around them gets loud, or when life gets overbusy, and listen to God for what is best. Sometimes this means that they need to radically prune what is good in order to embrace what the Lord leads them to as what is best. Alrighty, we're entering our 4th and final segment here, entitled Section 4, Long and Short Range Planning. You know, some home educators don't see the value of planning and structuring their weeks. They feel that detailed schedules and lesson plans limit the joyful creativity that is essential to their teaching. I would counter that in God's image, a teacher who works to develop schedules of regular weekly classes and other activities, and does detailed lesson planning and preparation weekly, builds for herself and her student a secure, reliable platform for her God-given creativity. In your Love the Journey assignment for this session, I've assigned you to read Chapter 13, entitled Schedules and Structure, and also Chapter 14, entitled A Time to Plan. In Chapter 13, I offer scriptural support for my assertion from Genesis 1 and 2. There, God is shown to be simultaneously the most orderly, detail-oriented planner of all time and the most creative being ever. Whenever we humans undertake complex tasks, we bring our limited faculties to the party. Unlike God, we don't know all things, past, present, and future. We only understand ourselves, our students, and our world in part. We forget things, we don't foresee things, and we lose things. Because of our needy condition, I truly believe the adage, if we fail to plan, we plan to fail, especially as regards excellent teaching. In the chapters in my book that I just referenced, I write at length about the benefits of doing long-range summer planning with pencil and one scheduling grid for each student in your home school, as well as one for yourself. I'll summarize the content of this chapter for you now, but please know that there's far more to glean by reading these chapters in the book. The purpose for creating detailed schedules while you're doing your long-range summer planning for a school year ahead is to see if there's room to do everything that you're wanting to commit yourself and your students to, given a perfect week, let alone one where life intrudes. Precisely because we have so many things to juggle, housework, meals, toddlers, school lessons, and outside activities, the goal is to be specific in our scheduling so that we can see if everything truly fits. So an example would be, okay, on Tuesday afternoons at 3 p.m., I'm going to do the vacuuming. And on Wednesdays, I'm going to run laundry and read the writing drafts. And Fridays after lunch, we'll do the library run and pick up the weekly groceries, etc. There's the chore part, and then there's the academic part. And in a homeschooler schedule, they all have to be included. The reason we put them all in is because if you tell yourself you're going to vacuum on Tuesday afternoons, you have to ask yourself if you'll have time to carpool to chess club at the same time. Doubtful. Now you're back to prioritizing, but at least you're doing so before you've either paid for the chess club dues or let the carpets get black with dirt. Putting down detailed plans on paper, including the tasks that we know we'll need to accomplish in order to be excellent teaching parents, can alert us to areas where we may have unwittingly made conflicting commitments or, again, areas where we need to prune. Writing schedules help us think through the order of our days according to wise, duly considered priorities. Then, as the busy year commences, such schedules can help us to not later make hasty, spur-of-the-moment choices when opportunity costs may not be as clearly apparent to us. In my experience, the toughest parts of wise living usually boil down to a combination of self-control plus diligence when we don't feel like it. If we're the types that like to be impulsive and take opportunities that come, at the very least, making schedules will tell us what we're giving up if we choose the spontaneous departures from them. Note what I'm saying here about where the true value of writing out the schedule really lies. The primary value of long-range planning is in the creation of the schedule, not in the following of it. For home teachers, seldom does what you put on your paper in the summer actually work out the way you envisioned it when you put it down. Children may not thrive with resources that you've chosen months earlier, or you may find that you've underestimated timing for certain things, or you've worked against natural rhythms of your family in small ways that would invite tinkering with your schedule. Often also, life happens. Things change dramatically and quickly. With your finances or with unforeseen opportunities that arise, like the formation of a local co-op group or music lessons becoming available that weren't when you made your schedule. Sometimes long-term illnesses within family or with aging parents make major changes to your schedule. So, again, the benefit of writing a schedule remains because you know what's changing and why. Your subsequent choices are informed ones, not shoot from the hip, emotion-driven ones. Okay. Enough on this pitch. Let's briefly talk on weekly planning rhythms as we wrap up this session. Remember, there's far more information given in Love the Journey on this topic than I can cover here. When we're talking about weekly lesson planning, we're thinking both of planning lesson assignments for the students and of doing personal preparation for teaching for yourself. Regular lesson planning forces us to look at the details of lesson contents ahead, which, again, builds towards an orderly, stable teaching platform. I understand that many of us want to be able to simply crack open the teacher's manual of our curriculum and teach the student all that he's to learn and then move on. And many curricula in today's market promise us the ability to do just this. This is an attractive idea for most of us because it plays into our desires, which are very human, for choosing the broad and easy way. There's nothing wrong with it if it can really be done effectively, but having taught 6 children K through 12 myself, I don't believe that ease of teaching should be the driving goal for a master teacher. What do I think should direct us instead? Well, the things that I talked about in session 1, the unique goals for our family that we have set ourselves in light of God's calling for us as parents and teachers. And the things that I talked about in session 2. Our teaching of academics is part of our overall calling, no doubt, but I've come to see that academics is a means to the end of making disciples and preparing them for lives of fruitful service. If our driving goal is the ease of teaching, of getting academics checked off our list as fast a way as possible, I don't think many of us will become master teachers. The reason I think that is because it simply takes personal involvement and time to disciple children. I believe that one has to understand how the academics become springboards for discipleship before one can become a master teacher. Remembering that more students are caught than taught, it stands to reason that if you aren't learning first and then teaching your children what you've internalized and what you're excited about communicating, why should your students care about the subject any more than you do? The opportunity that we have to share who we are with our children and shape their worldview and see them discover the world are priceless gifts that only those who do the actual work of interactive teaching receive. To me, as a parent and a homeschool curriculum author, academic studies are the stuff that gives parents and students the opportunity to have many meaningful, meaty, worldview-shaping discussions. For me, history and literature lessons don't center around dates and plots, and discussions aren't about going over the facts or stories to make sure that my older students understood what they read. Rather, my focus as a master teacher is on what I and my students think about what we read. The story of mankind was written by God, and He entered the plot in order to further it. What does that mean to me? That's what I need to discover during my personal preparation time. What does it mean to my student? That's what I'll find out during our discussion time. Together, my student and I will explore how the history of nation building, the wars and plagues that beset mankind, the building, the art, the good times all intersect with faith and love and the struggles that I have today. Can they inform me about God, about myself, about the world I live in? You bet. Can I help my student to see how they intersect? Yes, if I've thought about it myself, prayed for God's help, and then trusted in Him for outcomes. This is the essence of personal preparation time. It's about digging into the substance of the coming lessons and learn enough about them so that I can lead my students to make worldview connections. This is, to me, the essence of what we mean in our context by the term master teacher. That said, weekly planning time doesn't need to take a long time if you get a system down. The trick is to make a regular time each week when you can really sit down and plan. I used to do mine on Saturday mornings at the public library. Scott would take the kids and have daddy time, which sometimes meant cleaning together, sometimes science lesson, other times big projects outside like building a tree fort, or possibly just going to the park to play. During these precious hours, I got time to make assignments up for the children, to bone up on the contents of the lessons myself, to take out needed books out of the library, and also to drop by stores as necessary for school supplies on the way home. Vis-a-vis time constraints, I also want to say, for those of you using Tapestry of Grace, that weekly planning will take longer the first time you run through the curriculum. The story of history doesn't change as we revisit it time and again in 4-year cycles. Rather, we understand it more and more deeply, which is a real delight. So the goal in younger years is simply to get the story straight and clear in our mind, which can take a little more time. And then, as you come back to those time periods in future years, you'll have that foundation and just be adding layers to your depth of understanding as you and your children mature. Now, how do you do this weekly planning? Well, here are some basic elements that you should seek to incorporate. As you're doing your weekly planning, where you jot down your student assignments, make the time to browse their resources and to clearly understand how much you're assigning to them before the week starts. Then, as needed, you're going to write out student assignments into weekly charts that your younger students especially will work from. Older students can fill these out for themselves on a Monday morning or a Sunday night during planning time, which is something that we advise in Tapestry of Grace because it schools them in planning their own work, and they own it more if they do that. But if you have younger children, you're going to want to make up these assignment sheets ahead. Another part of weekly planning is to print out the needed worksheets or maps or things like that that you might want to use ahead of time. Again, this would have to be done from home, maybe in a different time slot. But if you are at the library planning, you might jot down what work pages and maps you're going to need to print out when you get back to your house. And then you're going to need to file these where you can easily find them. Now, many times in doing our planning and personal preparation, we can realize that we're missing key ingredients for the week ahead, like salt for a Salto map or markers for a display board. Seeing this in advance, we have time to buy the salt or the markers before the week begins. Being ahead of the curve when we come to teach via good planning is essential to peaceful, orderly, and reliable teaching. I think this is really just common sense, but I think also that many of us either mistakenly believe the fairy tale that we can successfully teach without taking the time to do personal preparation, or we simply don't create a regular time slot in our busy schedules for doing so, and thus we flounder as teachers. Now, part of your assignment for this week is to identify your weekly planning time, whether you already have it in place or need to carve one out anew. If you're just establishing this rhythm, after you've found your slot, we encourage you to share the times you've chosen with your family and begin to observe that time slot regularly. Oh, and no fair going out for coffee with girlfriends or dawdling on Facebook during this planning time. There are a bunch of temptations for us as we get so little free time. But get those priorities set and make the most of this time as the internal investment that it is. Phew, we have covered a lot in this session. We've said that there are at least 4 areas where the actual teaching of academics and the more invisible fabric of preparation, planning, and systems intersect. These are keeping our home environment orderly, developing paperwork, feedback, and record-keeping rhythms, prioritizing our time wisely and pruning as needed, and then scheduling and planning in regular seasons so that we're prepared to be effective teachers. Again, thanks for listening. I commend you for wanting to improve, and I am praying that God will bless you as you seek to serve your family to the best of your ability.